Good day, everyone. Welcome to Education 501 with the course title Philosophical and Sociological Foundations of Education. This video lecture is intended for my students at the Grad School of Eastern Visayas State University who are taking up Master of Arts in Education. And since the course is all about um, how philosophy and sociology play out or serve as foundations of education. So I believe that it's fitting for us to revisit our understanding of education. And I must acknowledge the fact that you're already in a graduate school, and I'm sure you already have mastered the meaning, nature, and dynamics of education, especially that your education graduates. But then again, for the sake of providing the background and context of our discussion, so please allow me to again revisit our understanding of education. So for today's lecture, I'll be talking about the definition, types, and characteristics of education. Okay, so let's dive right into the discussion now. So I'll start with the question, what is education? And here, the discussion will deal with two major parts, or will include two major parts. The first part will talk about the etymological definition of education, and the second major part, will talk about the formal definition of education, including its characteristics and types. And then in terms of types of education, we have, the formal, I'll be talking very briefly about the meaning of formal definition, including its types and examples, and then non-formal education, and then we will end with informal education. Okay, so for the etymology of the term education, education, as you may already know, comes from the two Latin words educare, which means to rear or to bring up, and educere, which means to lead out or to draw out. And when we say educare, this refers to the act of nurturing or training the young. And so in this case, it highlights the external guidance and instruction provided by teachers, parents, and institutions. Educere, on the other hand, refers to or emphasizes the idea of drawing out potential or developing latent abilities of course, the students. And here it suggests the internal developments of the learner's innate capacities, critical thinking, creativity, and personal growth. So before I proceed to the formal definition of education, I must emphasize a bit here the importance of emphasizing these two aspects of education, educare and educere, because most of the time, I always ask my students, during face-to-face classes about their understanding of education, and so most of the answers focused or highlight the educare part now, that education is all about training the students, teaching them how to become professionals, how to master skills, um, knowledge and things like that, so that at the end of the day, they will become, let's say, employable graduates and things like that. So there's nothing wrong with that, of course. In education, we need to, as professors, as teachers, we need to train our students, we need to teach our students about particular skills and knowledge and whatnot. But we should not forget the other side of the story, the other side, the other aspect of education, which is educere, which is not highlighted by many, I should say. Sometimes you forget. that in education, as teachers, after we provide external guidance or instruction, we should allow our students to be able to actualize their potentialities by themselves. So in this case, we're simply facilitator that would allow our students to become critical thinkers. Uh, we allow our students to think on their own. And critical thinking in this case is not just about the normal understanding of students are able to, think critically and analyze and interpret things. But critical thinking also involves the the idea that students questions, can think reflectively, can question their own beliefs, their own learnings, including the idea that students also question realities around them, that they do not just follow and obey standards and orders in the society, but they must also question these orders, these standards, these policies, whether they deserve to be followed or not. So students have, in that case, must also be allowed to be critical, and this is what we meant by holistic education. We include educare and educere in the process of educating our students, the child or the children in this case. Yeah. So much for the etymological definition of education. Let me now proceed to the formal definition of education. And formally speaking, education is a purposeful process of guiding and drawing out. You see, so formally speaking, education involves guiding and drawing out. Educere, educare, and educere. So it involves the process of guiding and drawing out the intellectual, moral, emotional, and physical developments of an individual or the student so that they may achieve self-fulfillments and contribute constructively to society. So I have to reiterate that education does not just involve teaching our students the necessary knowledge and skills for them to become employable graduates at the end of the day, to the point that they become cogs of the machines. Because especially in the outcomes based education, there is always the emphasis that our students should become technicians, experts in a specific skill, so that they will thrive in the industry and, yeah, be competent employees. While there's nothing wrong with that, of course, it is part of our responsibilities as professors, as teachers, or it is part of the responsibility of the educational institution to produce employable, competent graduates. But also at the same time, we should also develop the soft skills now that are necessary for the holistic development of the students, and that includes, of course, the moral aspects, the emotional and the moral and the physical aspect of the students. So we will not just produce excellent engineers, but also engineers, for example, that have the heart for the environments, for humanity, for the society. So it's not just all about, again, the profession of being an engineer, scientist, or whatever that is, you know. We must, at the end of the day, in the case of education, produce, well-rounded individuals at the end of the day. Okay, so um, that's how we formally define education. Let me now proceed to the three types of education, and I'll begin with the formal definition. Begin with formal definition, with formal education rather. Okay, so formal education refers to the structure and intentional learning that takes place in schools, colleges, universities, and other recognized institutions. And then, wait, wait for a while. And then the purpose of formal education is to equip individuals with formal with foundational knowledge, skills, and values and credentials needed for personal developments, professional careers, and active citizenship. So it is in this case that we see the role of educare, the teacher providing the guidance, the teacher, the instructor, the professors providing the guidance, in order to for the students to master some skills and knowledge that they cannot develop on their own. So while we also need to emphasize the ability of the students to push their learning further by themselves, we also have to acknowledge the fact that there are things that they could not fully and meaningfully learn on their own. And that's when they needed the guidance of the professors and teachers, instructors. Okay. And that is one of the functions of formal education, of course. Okay. And then some of the major characteristics of formal education includes um, following a specific curriculum approved by educational authorities. And so that is why in the case of the Philippines, for example, we have the Commission on Higher Education that provides, provide us with a standardized curriculum to be followed and implemented by um, higher education institutions in the country, in the Philippines. That is why we have and these standards are issued through CMOs. We call that in the Philippines CMOs, or Shared Memorandum Orders. And for this reason, formal education is planned and systematic. There are always hierarchy and structure and whatnot. Formal education is also divided into levels. That is why we have, for example, we have elementary, secondary, and tertiary, and we have the graduate and postgraduate. And for this reason, formal education is a graded structure. And then formal education, informal education learning is directed by certified teachers. That is why, again, in the case of higher education institutions in the Philippines, um, teachers now, instructors now, or professors now are required to have at least the master's degree to be able to teach in universities. In other countries, in most countries, especially in highly developed countries, the requirement is a PhD or even a postdoctorate. But in the Philippines, a master's degree is enough for me to teach in the university. And so we certify educators. In the case of education, they have to pass the licensure exam for teachers, license LPT. And in the case of highly technical courses like engineering, professors must have, at least in the Philippines, must have a license, in the field. In addition, of course, to the master's degree required by CHA. And for this reason, formal education is teacher-led, okay? Teacher-centered. It is we put premium on the role of the teacher, of the instructor, or the professor in delivering courses for students to master and learn. And then formal education is conducted in informal settings like schools and universities, needless to say. And for this reason, formal education is institution based. You have to go to school, of course, enroll. The school follow some rules, complete the program, and graduate from it, receive the diploma. And so in this case, another characteristic of formal education is that learners receive diplomas, certificates or degrees upon completion. And for this reason, um, formal education is credential oriented. Okay, some an example examples of formal education includes, elementary or primary school. Then we have high school or secondary education. We have college or university education, and so we have technical vocational training programs certified by government agencies. Okay, so much for the meaning and characteristics and examples of formal education. Let me now proceed to non-formal education. And non-formal education refers to organized and structured learning that takes place outside the formal school system, but is still intentional and goal-oriented. Put differently, non-formal education is the natural learning we all experience through everyday life without classrooms or textbooks. It is important to note that non-formal education aims to provide accessible learning opportunities for people who may have missed or cannot attend formal schooling. Okay, so that's one of the primary aims of non-formal education. And some of the characteristics of non-formal education includes the fact that it has specific objectives, but does not follow a rigid structure of formal education. And for this reason, non-formal education is organized but flexible. Another characteristics is that in non-formal education is that learners choose to participate based on interest or need. So unlike formal education, wherein the student has to follow a structured, a planned, and systematic program of study in non-formal education, they can choose what to learn based on interest and need. And for this reason, non-formal education involves voluntary participation. Another characteristic of non-formal education is that courses may be conducted over days or weeks rather than years. So in formal education, a degree could be completed in 3 years or 4 years or sometimes 5 years. So it is long term. But in non-formal education, sometimes it could be done in just 3 days or 1 week or sometimes 1 month. And so for this reason, non-formal education often is short term. And non-formal education also focuses on practical knowledge and skills for daily life, livelihoods, or personal growth. I think that's quite self-explanatory. And for this reason, non-formal education is learner-centered. So we put premium in non-formal education, we put premium on the students themselves, on what they wanted to learn, what they wanted to, master and whatnot. Okay. And then examples of non-formal education, we have community-based literacy programs. We also have health and environmental awareness campaigns. We have adult education classes, um, skills training or livelihood workshops, and alternative learning system, or ALS in the case of the Philippines. Okay. Okay, so much for the non-formal education. Let me now proceed to the last topic, informal education. Informal education refers to the lifelong process of learning that occurs outside of a formal school or structured educational setting. It is unplanned, spontaneous, and often driven by daily life experiences, interactions, and observations. Some of the characteristics of informal education is the fact that it does not follow a set curriculum, syllabus, or fixed schedule. Okay? And for this reason, informal education is non-structured and spontaneous. Another characteristic of informal education is that in informal education, learning can happen at home, in the community, at work, in social gatherings, or through media like TV, books, or the internet. And in today's world, the famous learning through the university, through YouTube University, through through social media, people learn from inspirational video clips through Facebook Reels or in YouTube. And admittedly, today I'm also learning a lot from YouTube, from Google, from other platforms that provide free education informally to the masses. And for this reason, informal education takes place anywhere, anytime. Another characteristic of informal education is that it doesn't typically lead to diplomas or formal qualifications. So people simply learn from realities, from experiences, from whatever that is provided around them. Like again, learnings in social media. And for this reason, there is no certification in informal education. Another characteristic is that it often or informal education often responds to the interests and needs and curiosity of the individual. So for example, a DepEd teacher, a mathematics teacher in DepEd who teaches, of course, mathematics from Monday to Friday can or may learn about propagating roses or propagating orchids during the weekends or during their free time. Um, so again, informal education in that case responds to the interest of the teacher. Okay? Or an engineer, a civil engineer wanting to learn dance instructing, and become a dance instructor during the weekend. So this is a concrete example of an informal education that is based on the interest of the individual. And for this reason, just like non-formal education, informal education is also learner-centered. And lastly, in informal education, learning happens through doing, observing, asking questions, or imitating others. And for this reason, informal education is experience-based. Some examples of informal education are, first, a child learning to cook by watching their parents in the kitchen. So it's based on, the curiosity or the interest of the child. So in this process, of course, the child learns how to cook rice, how to cook vegetables, and cook eggs and whatnot. So by just watching the parents or by just observing how do chefs or cooks prepare the kitchen, the child can learn from that. Another example is learning a new skill from YouTube or social media tutorials. So as I already mentioned, we learn a lot from social media nowadays, especially YouTube. And in fact, even in formal, in the case of formal education, we master, for example, some difficult topics in engineering like thermodynamics, and if the students could not fully understand or get the lesson during face-to-face lectures by the teacher or by the professor, the student, of course, can refer to Google or to YouTube to learn, or to push the idea further, to push the learning further about thermodynamics. So the same with in the case of informal education, if there's something you wish to learn, you can resort to social media like YouTube in this case. And then another example is gaining financial literacy from conversations with friends or mentors. So, for example, I am a philosophy professor, but I don't have trainings in financial literacy, and I don't have trainings in public finance. And since I am a campus director in a state university, I must, learn these things. So I'm able to learn about procurement, public procurements. I learn about public finance, and other related stuff, by just, talking to colleagues, asking some questions, and observing how they do things in the procurement office, in the finance, and all stuff for that matter. So I learned so many things from my friends and my colleagues, and that's an example again of an informal, education. And lastly, another example of informal education is acquiring cultural values and language through community involvement. So that is still education in the strict sense of the word. So, for example, I am a Bisaya person. I am Cebuano, and I'm doing research on indigenous communities in the Philippines, particularly Ati indigenous communities in Panay Island and the Mamanua indigenous peoples in Surigao del Sur. So every time we go to the community, we learn about their practices, their values, their belief systems, and including some, a little bit of the language, because we immerse ourselves in the community as researchers and as extensionists. And so every time we go to the community, to the Mamanua community in Surigao del Sur, and in the Ati community in Panay Island, we're learning from them. And we're learning about their culture, about their language, and other stuff that we learn from the community. So again, that is still education in the strict sense of the words informally. Okay, so so much for the discussion on what education, or our revisit on the meaning and nature and dynamics of education, including its type and characteristics. Thank you very much for your attention. And in the next video lecture, I will be talking about how philosophy plays out or serves as a foundation of education, and another video lecture on what is sociology and how sociology plays out or serves as a social as a foundation of education in this case. So thank you very much, and that's all for now. Have a nice one. Have a nice day and have a good one, everyone. Thank you very much.